She turned up with 2 bags and a smile. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in York. The clouds had gathered above the neat rows of brick houses like they always did, soft, grey, and a little moody. Jonathan Langdon was tapping away on his laptop in the conservatory, finalizing plans for a new row of retirement flats on the edge of town. Louisa, his wife, was upstairs finishing a video call with her team in London. Everything felt as it should. Until the doorbell rang. Jonathan frowned. They weren't expecting anyone. He rose, stretched his back, and walked through the hallway, adjusting a picture frame slightly askew on the wall. When he opened the door, there she was. "Mum," he said, blinking. Edith Langdon stood on the doorstep in her old trench coat, 2 worn suitcases by her feet, and a smile that didn't quite reach her tired eyes. "Hello, dear," she said brightly. "Surprise." Jonathan stood frozen for a moment, stunned. His mother hadn't mentioned anything about visiting, let alone staying. "I thought I'd come for a few days." House felt a bit too quiet, she added, as if explaining the weather. From upstairs, Louisa called out, "Who is it, John?" He didn't answer straight away. Then he cleared his throat and stepped aside. "Come in." Edith shuffled into the warm hallway, taking in the framed photographs, the scent of fresh linen, and the faint whiff of candles Louisa always lit in the evenings. "It's lovely, this place," she said, patting his arm. Louisa appeared at the top of the stairs. Her face shifted the moment she saw Edith. "Edith." "Oh, how unexpected." "Well," Edith said cheerfully, "life's too short for invitations, don't you think?" Jonathan managed a weak smile, but his stomach churned. He hadn't lived with his mother in years, and her sudden presence felt like someone had thrown a stone into a still pond. "Just for a few days," Edith repeated, picking up one of her bags. He didn't have the heart to say no. That evening, Edith settled into the guest bedroom, unpacking neatly as if she'd done this before. Jonathan sat on the edge of the sofa, phone in hand, typing a message to Louisa who was only meters away in the kitchen. "We'll just ride it out. She won't stay long." But deep down, he wasn't so sure. That night, Edith made tea for them all, served it in silence, and smiled even as her son barely looked up from his phone. Something in her had changed, but what, Jonathan couldn't quite put his finger on. And upstairs, as rain began to tap gently against the windows, Edith sat on the edge of her bed, looking at an old photo she'd brought with her, of her, Jonathan, and his father, taken years ago in Cornwall. Her fingers traced the edges slowly, then she whispered to herself. "It'll only be a few days, unless they need me longer." Outside, thunder rumbled softly. But inside the house, something had already begun to shift. The quiet tension beneath the surface. The following morning dawned pale and misty over York. Edith woke early, her body still adjusting to a new routine. She padded softly down the stairs and found Jonathan already in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone as usual. "Good morning, Mum," he said without looking up. Edith smiled gently. "Morning, Jonathan. Did you sleep well?" "Fine," he muttered. Louisa entered, tying her hair back. She nodded curtly at Edith but said nothing. The atmosphere felt tight, like a stretched wire ready to snap. Edith busied herself making tea. She watched the steam curl up from the cups, thinking how strange it was to live with her son again but feel like a guest in her own home. Later, she decided to take a walk through the neighborhood. The cobbled streets of York held memories of her youth, shops where she once worked, the little bakery with the best scones, and the ancient cathedral whose bells chimed every hour. As she wandered, Edith noticed the small cafe on the corner, run by a kindly woman named Mrs. Penrose. The sign read, "The Ivy Leaf Cafe." It looked welcoming, but Edith felt a pang of loneliness. Returning home, she found Jonathan waiting with a serious look. "We need to talk," he said. Edith nodded, bracing herself. Jonathan took a deep breath. Mum, I know this isn't easy for you or us. Louisa and I have a busy life. You staying here, it's complicated. Edith's smile faltered. I understand. I just want you to know, we're doing our best. Edith looked at him, her son, so grown up, burdened by his own worries. I'm not here to be a burden, she said softly. Jonathan's eyes softened for a moment, but then he sighed. Maybe, you could find something to do. Something to keep you busy. Edith thought about that. A purpose could be just what she needed. Maybe I will, she said quietly. Jonathan gave a small nod, the tension easing slightly between them. But neither of them knew that this suggestion would soon change everything. A new beginning at the Ivy Leaf Café. The next morning, Edith made her way to the Ivy Leaf Café. The bell above the door chimed softly as she stepped inside. Mrs. Penrose looked up from the counter, her eyes warm with surprise. Well, if it isn't Edith Langdon. What a lovely surprise. Edith smiled shyly. I was wondering if you might need some help around here. Mrs. Penrose wiped her hands on her apron. We've been a bit short-staffed lately. Could you start this week? Edith nodded, a spark of hope kindling inside her. I'd be happy to. As the days passed, Edith found herself slipping into a comforting routine. She greeted regulars by name, remembered their favorite orders, and listened to their stories with genuine interest. Her calm presence brought a quiet charm to the cafe that hadn't been there before. One afternoon, Thomas and Louisa stopped by unexpectedly. Jonathan had mentioned his mother's new job, but neither had visited yet. Louisa's eyes scanned the room, then softened as she saw Edith carefully arranging freshly baked scones on a tray. Looks like you've found your place, she murmured. Thomas gave a small smile but remained silent. Later that evening, Jonathan called Edith. How are things at the cafe? He asked. Busy, but good, she replied. I'm glad to be doing something. There was a pause. I'm proud of you, Jonathan said quietly. Edith felt a warmth in her chest she hadn't felt in years. Yet beneath the surface, tensions lingered, unspoken questions about family, independence, and belonging. Edith wondered how long this fragile peace would last. Unseen struggles and quiet strength. Days turned into weeks, and Edith grew more comfortable at the Ivy Leaf Café. She enjoyed the simple rhythms, the sound of the coffee machine, the laughter of customers, the smell of fresh bread. Yet at home, things remained strained. Louisa was polite but distant, and Thomas's once casual indifference sometimes sharpened into subtle criticism. One evening, Edith overheard a heated conversation between Thomas and Louisa in the kitchen. I don't see why we have to keep her here, Louisa said coldly. She's your mother too, Thomas replied quietly. Louisa scoffed. She's not my problem. Edith's heart ached. She wanted to speak up but held back, not wanting to cause more tension. Instead, she threw herself into her work at the cafe, finding solace in the smiles she received from regular patrons. One afternoon, Mrs. Penrose confided in her. You've brought new life to this place, Edith, she said kindly. Sometimes, the smallest changes make the biggest difference. Edith nodded, feeling a quiet pride. Still, the evenings were lonely. She often sat by the window, watching the rain fall on York's ancient streets, wondering if things would ever change at home. The promise of belonging seemed just out of reach. But Edith knew she had to keep moving forward, no matter what. An unexpected gesture of kindness. One chilly autumn morning, Edith arrived at the cafe to find a small notice pinned to the bulletin board. It was an invitation to a community event held in York's town hall, a gathering for older residents to share stories and talents. Mrs. Penrose noticed Edith's interest. Why don't you go? It might be good for you to meet others. You have stories to tell, after all. Edith hesitated but then agreed. At the event, Edith felt nervous at first. The room buzzed with chatter, but she soon found herself drawn into conversations about old York, family traditions, and life's unexpected twists. When it was her turn, Edith shared a story about her days as a librarian, the books she loved, and the lessons she learned from them. The audience listened intently, many nodding in appreciation. Afterwards, a few people approached her with warm smiles, inviting her to join their weekly book club. Edith felt a sense of belonging she hadn't known in years. Back at the cafe, business was thriving. Regulars returned not just for coffee, but to share in the sense of community Edith helped foster. That evening, Jonathan surprised her with a call. "I heard about the event." "Sounds like you're finding your feet," he said. "I am," Edith replied, smiling. "Thank you for encouraging me." Jonathan paused. "I'm sorry if I've been distant. It's just hard sometimes." "I understand," Edith said softly. For the first time in a long while, hope flickered in their relationship. A storm brewing at home. Despite the growing warmth Edith found in the cafe and the community, tensions at home began to simmer dangerously. One evening, after a long day, Edith returned to find the atmosphere thick with silence. Thomas and Louisa were seated at the dining table, faces tense. Without looking up, Thomas said, "We need to talk." Louisa nodded sharply. "It's about your job at the cafe." Edith felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. "We don't think it's appropriate," Thomas continued. "You're our guest, not an employee." "But I want to contribute," Edith replied softly. "This job means a lot to me." Louisa's eyes narrowed. "It's beneath you. You shouldn't have to work at your age." "Times have changed," Edith said firmly. "I'm not the same person I was." The conversation grew heated. Words were exchanged that left Edith feeling both hurt and misunderstood. That night, Edith lay awake, wondering if she could ever truly be accepted. Meanwhile, at the Ivy Leaf, Mrs. Penrose noticed the change in Edith's demeanor. "You're stronger than you think," she said gently. "But you don't have to face this alone." Edith nodded, grateful for the friendship that had become her anchor. A ray of hope amidst shadows. The days that followed were tense and quiet. Edith poured herself into the cafe, finding comfort in its familiar bustle. One afternoon, as she wiped down tables, Louisa entered quietly. "I wanted to apologize," she said softly, surprising Edith. "For what?" Edith asked, cautious but curious. "For being harsh. I didn't understand your reasons." Edith smiled gently. "Thank you, Louisa. That means a lot." From that moment, a fragile bridge began to form between them. Thomas, too, started to soften. He invited Edith for tea one afternoon and listened as she shared stories from her youth. Slowly, walls began to crumble. Meanwhile, the Ivy Leaf continued to thrive. Edith's warmth and kindness had woven a new fabric of community. One evening, as the cafe closed, Mrs. Penrose handed Edith a small wrapped box. "For you," she said, her eyes twinkling. Inside was a delicate silver locket. "To remind you that you are valued and loved." Tears filled Edith's eyes. For the first time in months, she felt truly seen. A new beginning. The morning sun cast a warm glow over Bristol as Edith arrived at the Ivy Leaf, her steps lighter than before. News of her journey had spread through the community, inspiring many who faced their own struggles. Thomas and Louisa joined her at the cafe that day, their faces softened by understanding and respect. "I'm proud of you, Mum," Thomas said quietly. Louisa nodded. "We were wrong to doubt you." Edith smiled, feeling the years of loneliness and hardship begin to fade. The cafe was bustling with familiar faces, laughter, and stories being shared. Mrs. Penrose placed a steaming cup of tea in front of Edith. "To new beginnings," she toasted. Edith raised her cup, her heart full of hope. In that moment, she knew she had found more than a job. She had found a family, a community, and a renewed sense of purpose.